The impact of COVID, of the coronavirus, really started to hit in a kind of a heavy way in March, where people started speaking about customers basically just disappearing, you know, the whole kind of your income stream really being massively reduced. And then so by the 22nd, 23rd of March, that weekend, a lot of women in our group who were working in so-called managed brothels. A lot of women were working in those places, our mums, because they could fit it in around school shifts and that kind of thing. And so they were left in a particularly desperate situation. What we were hearing is that then people started to scramble around to try and find some other form of income. A few women tried to move online, but it's a very hard work, a lot of competition, a lot of work for much less money than you would have got under other circumstances at this moment in time. What we're hearing day in, day out is that people have been thrown into a terrible crisis. Some women have just been forced to go back to work. They didn't want to. Everybody wants to kind of follow the rules and the regulations of the lockdown, but they were put in a position where it was literally they were going to lose their home and they hadn't got food. You know, they just didn't have anything. So they're trying to work in ways which minimize their risk. But like a lot of other zero contract precarious workers, they have been forced to do some kind of work.
People are dealing with food shortages in like new and unprecedented ways. They're finding their local food bank empty. You know, it's like they're struggling for donations. A lot of people are single parents. And they're dealing with mental health difficulties that are exacerbated by being on lockdown with their families and carrying the pressure of worrying about income for those families. It's a really tough time. There's just like this crushing sense of not knowing what's coming. And I think a lot of people, even the most marginalized sex workers, have this belief that the sex industry will always be there. I think, you know, that's part of what the big attraction is around sex work for the most marginalized people, is like the dependability of the fact that there's always a sex industry, even if it has ups and downs within it. I don't think anybody predicted a case where the entire industry would just vanish. And that is like, I think that's given a lot of people a deep sense of panic.
For sex workers who were registered as self-employed, you know, we know that under context of criminalisation and stigma, that sex workers can't register as self-employed in the way that other workers can. So many people kind of will register as something else, as a masseuse, or as some sort of other kind of holistic healing worker, or you go by another name. They want to clear their income because they're worried about people kind of knowing that they are actually doing sex work. So in these cases, and the self-employment protection that's come out and the safety nets there, they're either just not enough, considering people's income has fluctuated the year before, or people haven't registered in the first place as self-employed. And why would people register in a context where their work is criminalised and they are denied labour rights in the first place?
And we're still seeing women actually being taken to court for loitering and soliciting. You know, we were told by a couple of women working on the street that a group of women had been taken to Highbury and Islington Magistrates Court, arrested and charged with loitering and soliciting, which is really an outrageous thing, because the idea that at this moment in time people are being arrested in that way, you know, what are they going to do? They're going to convict people and fine people at this moment when people have no money, not even to eat. And the other very worrying thing is, I know people generally are concerned about the police using this moment in time to increase surveillance and increase their powers generally against people. And I think sex workers have good reason to be concerned about that, because we also heard of a couple of women who were stopped and arrested as suspected vectors of disease, you know, and it's back to that kind of stigma and discrimination that had really passed in some ways, where sex workers were treated as high risk for spreading disease. And it seems like the police and the authorities are using this crisis to really reinforce that kind of stigma and prejudice. One of the things that's been shocking for us is that the police were still kind of raiding premises right up until the point when some of those kind of more visible brothels closed. In many other cases, criminal justice proceedings have been put on hold, whereas we're hearing from women in our network that we're actually facing prosecution, that the police are still literally actively investigating them. So a woman just, 2 days ago was actually visited by the police, and they tried to use the crisis to get her to sign, not only to take a caution, which is the equivalent of guilt, but when she refused that, they said, well, in that case, we're going to further investigate all your finances, and tried to get her to sign to, give her permission to have access to all her personal information. For women that were left without any income at all, the only option in the UK, it was to apply for universal credit. And that is a very onerous and torturous process at the best of times. We've done a lot of work trying to help people with those applications, and it is very slow. There's massive waits and the rest of it. And when you get it, there's a delay before you get your full money. And when you do get your full money, it's only £79 a week for a single person, and nobody can live on that. And in addition, some of the women in our group are young, they're under 25, and so they're not even entitled to their full housing costs.
For some people, it is just impossible to live on universal credit, or there's a period of time where they're still kind of in the application process. So they literally are without the means to buy basic necessities. So we are seeing that people are still continuing to work during this time, to see clients either in their home or to do out calls. And nobody wants to continue to work. I feel like whenever we say that, there's a bit of backlash. And I think that shame and stigma is just something that we have to keep refuting. I mean, these are people who are literally cannot afford to pay their rent, cannot afford to pay for food. So in those circumstances, we want the government to at least fund home testing kits and access to home posted contraceptives as well. Because the clinics have shut here in Scotland, sex workers who are in that situation still want to be able to try and protect their health as best as possible. We are also calling for prioritised access to universal credit, not just of sex workers, but other people in vulnerable situations who are most impacted by COVID-19. And then lastly, the moratorium on raids and arrests, and also surveillance of sex workers. We've heard cases of the police actually screening website platforms to see who's still active and who's working. Many of the people that show is showing today or available today are just trying to increase attention and then maybe negotiate an appointment for after this isolation period has ended, or bring people into online platforms. But the police are actually screening that at the moment, and we think that the police trying to increase surveillance of sex workers at this time is a waste of resources. It's increasing fear, anxiety, and stigma towards sex workers, who really are the most precarious of our community.
But we also decided at a very early point that we wanted to really focus our efforts on making demands from the government. And we have made the case for emergency payments for women who are destitute. We use as a precedent the fact that in 2006, there was a series of really terrible murders in Ipswich, a town outside London. And then the government decided that the absolute imperative was for women to be able to get off the street, and they literally gave cash to women for a limited period of time. You didn't have to apply for benefits, you just literally got the cash in your hands, and you got various other financial support. You also got priority for housing. So they've done it before, and they could do it again. They could actually deal with the women who are destitute and homeless in that way. And then in relation to other sex workers, we've been demanding changes to universal credit to get rid of the wait before you get money, to increase the amount by at least, to double it at the very least, make sure that all people's housing costs are paid. And then we want status like other workers. We've been told that it's not the moment to raise decriminalisation. We disagree, because New Zealand did decriminalise sex workers, and they have been entitled to wage supplements and other benefits in a way that if we had been able to access that here, we would have all been in a completely different situation. So it is the time to demand decriminalisation. And of course, we want the same rights as others, like rent relief, an end to evictions, for there to be a firewall between immigration law and other regulations so that migrant sex workers can access healthcare without fear of deportation.
The government must financially contribute to the emergency funds that are already being set up and being run by sex worker-led organisations. So we've heard that the government are already considering putting finance into some other crisis funds, but these funds are led by organisations that sex workers don't trust. They're not based on an honesty process, and they are actually fundamentally aiming during this time and seeing this as an opportunity to actually exit sex workers from doing sex work. So whilst it's of course important at the moment to think about diversifying income, we would not see this as an opportunity and actually see that as, you know, quite coercive actually, as an opportunity to try and get people out of sex work and into another profession.
The work that I've been doing on the hardship fund, it's been a small team of us, and we've basically been going through about 1,500 applications that we've had, which have come in very quickly, and the applications are increasing. The amount that we're getting every day increases every day, basically, which actually is following the pattern that the virus itself is taking. Because the longer this goes on, the more and more desperate people are getting. And it's striking that once again, it's sex workers who are there doing that work for the community. Something that I'm noticing a lot on the phones is that people can't really believe, that we're taking an honesty-based approach, whereby we do screen people to check their sex workers, but we don't subject them to the same kind of probing, violent questioning that they used to within the benefit system. You know, we just chat with them about their work and try and connect on a peer-to-peer level. People do feel like, as I said before, like confused about what they're entitled to, if anything. Some people haven't been claiming benefits, and then this is their first time.
With the emergency fund, when we started it, we really didn't see how much demand, or didn't envisage how much demand there would be for it. Our applications are increasing every day. We don't have the staff resources to verify people in the way and as fast as we'd like to. So we're now trying to apply for some emergency funding to support us in that process. But again, like Juno said there, actually it's all sex worker volunteers that are doing all the resourcing and administration of this fund. And actually a large part of the donations came from sex workers. And I just think it's actually, we need to be very clear in running these funds that this should not substitute government funding.